This is Christopher Scott, the hip hop social worker. And man, recently I just had a barbershop talk where me and a group of men talked about health, life, marriage, all those things. It was a great conversation. We talked about going to the doctor, knowing who your primary care physician is. Admittedly, I did not have one at the time. I mean, I have one, but I haven't seen him in 2 years. I'm trying to get my act together before I go see him, so I can be like, bam, I did it. But neither here nor there. We talked about mortality because some information was released in that talk and talked about how to deal with that and those kind of things. And the next day, find out that Chris Johnson, all pro running back, diagnosed with ALS. ALS is a very degenerative disease that attacks your motor function, right? My grandfather died from ALS. He died before I was born, so I never got to meet him, but he had died from ALS. So ALS to me is like in the shadows. It's like I don't know if it's hereditary. I know nobody else in my family has had it. I'm always thinking like, man, am I gonna wake up one day, my hands not feeling right, my feet not feeling right, and I go to the doctor and boom, what I'm saying, it's there, so, but yeah, it definitely was, hard to see him there like that, and just kind of, remind you how fragile, life can be, strong man, what I'm saying? He broke records in the NFL. He wasn't just like, oh, I played in the NFL. No, he was the NFL for a few seasons, right? Like he was the guy, and just to know how fast it can turn was like eye opening. Well, it's not necessarily eye opening, but it can be, like I said, saying my grandfather died from ALS. So I'm always thinking like, is it hereditary? Is it not? A quick Google search told me that it's not hereditary, but then that is sporadic. So that still is kind of like, well, okay, there's no like clear, line that because my grandfather had it that I would have it, but it is sporadic, so you still can get it, and it just crushes me to see something like that. But I also brought up, some points of like with the NFL, football sport. The sport of football, we know it's a dangerous sport. I enjoy watching football. I can't wait for the Oregon Duck football season to come up, because we're going to go to some games. But I'm thinking like, is enough ever enough? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like if football harms one person, that's one person too many. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like, yes, people sign up to play football. If you make it to the pros, you're handsomely, compensated, right? But at the same time, it's like, what's it worth, to entertain us, right? To entertain the non-football players, right? To entertain the world, to entertain their city, entertain their schools, entertain their fan base. Is it worth all that? Like how guilty are we to show up and keep watching football? You know what I mean? Like I feel like I definitely thought about that because especially when I see the conversation revolving around, football, neurology, what I'm saying, physical injuries, CTE, how it impacts the brain, the muscle. I mean, just the body in general, right? And we show up to watch football, what I'm saying, like clockwork. Now, I'm not saying anything. I'm just thinking out loud, thinking about what this is me thinking, right? Still gonna go watch Oregon Ducks football, but I'm just you had to, like, I feel like at that moment I had to stop and be like, man, like at what cost? At what cost? Do we need these things in life? Do we need to show up and cheer for our team? I mean, we're going to do it, but I know a few people with sons that won't let their kid play football, and I feel like that's probably the right decision because, like at what cost, right? Also, I don't know if this is controversial or not, our access to medicine. Chris Johnson was a wealthy man. He has state of the art treatment that's happening, and, ALS does not just, impact rich people. There's people who don't have those resources that get ALS, and that's also an alarming, kind of slap in the face as well. Not slap in the face. It's also an alarming kind of, it's also hard to see that. It's also hard. It's also, it's hard to ignore, that if you're poor with these diseases, you're going to die. That just is what it is. There's no, if you can't afford, to call a special doctor or to get the special communicator, it's just, get your affairs in order because you're on a ticking time clock, so, that was also kind of just a reminder of the, we could have universal health care where the amount of money you make, wouldn't determine if you lived or died. That's just kind of how I feel about things. I could be wrong. Hey, somebody let me know if universal health care is not the case, because, I know life ain't that easy. You know what I'm saying? Money does make the world go round, but I just would hate to be, because I'm not a wealthy person. And like I said, the thought of having ALS, because my grandpa had it, always, it's just kind of, in the back of my mind, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, what I do, so if I, excuse me, if I got it, it's just a wrap, I guess, so, but yeah, there's just a few things, like the privileges of our world at what cost, costing people, their life. And like I said, he was well compensated. I feel like because he was well compensated, people might brush it off like, well, he got paid. He knew what he was doing. He was this, he was that. Life happens. Life is unfair. But man, does it have to be that way? Does it have to be so cut and dry? Like, can we, for a second, stop and think about somebody else, anybody else, so anyway.